Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which time zone you're in. The Mind User Guide. So I started life as an engineer, and engineers are very curious people. So for the last 10 years, I've been fascinated with how the mind works. Because to my mind, it's the most amazing piece of kit we've got. We can do incredible things with it, or it can take us to dark places. And nobody gave us a user guide, and it's not as intuitive to use as an iPhone. So I share in lots of workshops what goes on in our minds, why we find some things easier to do than others, and just give very practical tools and techniques of how to do that. I had a big breakthrough during lockdown when I helped a friend out who'd suffered with something for 60 odd years, and in a 2-hour walk managed to help him with a solution that set him free. So he said to me, give up your day job of running businesses and things and start doing this instead. So that's why I'm here. Oops. So everything we ever did or will do started with a thought. Just consider that for a moment. Everything we ever did or will do started with a thought. And those thoughts can either hold us hostage and hold us back, or they can propel us forwards. From those thoughts, we then drive what actions we do or don't take as a result of those thoughts. It's put a lot better by a chap called Vincent Peale with this quote. I think it sums it up far more eloquently than I can. So there's all sorts of models about how the brain works. All of them are wrong because as an engineer, ex-engineer, I know that all models are just there to try and help us understand. But I want to share this model with you because I think it helps explain a few things. So if we go back in time, 500 million years, in fact, then we've got the first evolution of our brain, the so-called reptilian brain, which main focus was survival, just getting us through the day, making sure we survive. And the way that part of the brain particularly worked was with images, is understanding things through sight. So if it saw in the corner of our eye something that looked like a snake, that's pretty important, and we want that information. But as time evolved, our brains clearly thought, yeah, survival's great, but if we don't nurture our young and bring them up, then we're not actually going to carry on as a species. So the limbic brain started to evolve, which is using emotion. So that's really developed mainly to look after our young. So as you can imagine, the main programming language of that part of the brain is emotion. And then far more recently, in the last sort of 500,000 years, we've got the neocortex, the sort of real thinking, rational brain. So that's the one that can think about past, future, and present. It can solve problems for us and can really sort of patch through things. So that part of the brain mainly thinks about language. That's its main mode of communication. And this is a very generic way of looking at it. But if you think of the two older parts of the brain as the unconscious part of the brain, that's where our habits sit, which is 95% of what we do. So driving, riding a bike, typing into a computer, all the things we take for granted, how our body moves, blood regulates, all those things. There's so much going on, and it's all just happening as habits, which go on without any emotion. We just don't notice them happening. Whereas the conscious part of the brain is the rational reasoning part of the brain. In fact, up to the age of about 7, our conscious brain hasn't really developed at all. And our unconscious brain just soaks everything up like a sponge. That's where we get our values and our principles from. That's where our biggest part of our personality comes from. And you can notice that in things that, so when you're younger, in most cultures, we're told quite wisely not to speak to strangers. Fantastic advice if you're less than 7. But as we get older, if that advice sat very strongly with us and we're in a sales role and now we've got to speak to strangers, it doesn't particularly help us. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's that affects us actually before the age of 7. But if you turn the timeline of the older parts of the brain and the modern part of the brain into a clock, into a 24-hour clock, the neocortex, if you did it as 24 hours, has only been around for 3 minutes before midnight. So actually the older parts of the brain have a far bigger impact on what we do. And that's what we'll learn about a bit more. So one way of explaining some of this is we've often heard of the expression, what's a gut feeling? I've got a gut feeling about something. I just have this sense about something. Actually, what that is that particularly comes up if someone's doing a quiz. If you see a quiz program on the television, some people often say, I've got a gut feeling I know the answer, but I'm not quite sure. And the gut feeling is because you've stored everything you've ever remembered. And the older part of the brain, the limbic part, which communicates emotionally, is screaming at you, I know the answer, I know the answer. This is the answer. And it's trying to communicate to you with gut feeling. So that's what gut feeling is. And in fact, recent science has shown that we don't only store our memories in our brain, but we do actually store it in our gut tissue as well. So it's even more got even more relevance, I guess. And another thing that sometimes people talk about is beginner's luck. You see it maybe with a golf match or something like that, where someone's never played before, but mysteriously they get a hole in one. What's going on there? Well, this comes up a lot in sport because our unconscious brain, our sort of ancient part, is very powerful in terms of it can do all sorts of things. If you just ask it to simply hit a ball into a hole over a long distance, it will calculate it, it will work it out, and probably has a pretty good idea of how to do it. And if you just let it be, it will probably achieve that. But if your thinking brain, your more recent, in evolutionary terms, gets in the way and starts to doubt, not sure if you can do this, I don't know about that, the wind's a bit strong at the moment, you start to end up doubting yourself. So that's why a lot of sports people use visualization to just get their mind to focus on delivering what it is that they want to achieve. Now, I spoke earlier about the older parts of the brain have been around for a lot longer. And because of that, we're still very much focused on noticing negative things, threats, much quicker, much more easily than we do with positive things. And Dr. Rick Hanson, I think, put it far more eloquently than I ever could, and talked about negative things, modern threats, is like Velcro. They just stick to us very quickly. And positive thoughts are like Teflon. We have to work a lot harder to retain positive thoughts. In fact, one of my workshops I do is called Happy Habits, which teaches people how to retain and enjoy those sort of happy thoughts a lot quicker. So we have to work a lot harder because we've got a natural propensity to notice negative things quicker and for longer. And in fact, when we get stressed, our brain works in a way that it makes us remember, helps us remember when we were last in that situation, and we start to forget older memories and more recent ones. That's why if you get stressed before you go into a meeting, you suddenly start forgetting people's names and things that you would normally know, because that part of the stress is kicking in. The other really important part about how our minds work, particularly the ancient parts of our minds, is the ancient part of our mind behaves the same way to real or imagined events, which on the face of it sounds really strange. But if you think about, if you've watched a film and you've got really stressed watching the film because someone's being kidnapped, they're being chased, or if you watch horror movies, I don't personally watch horror movies, you feel the emotion. You start to feel what's going on. And the same way if we have nightmares. In fact, when we're asleep, the conscious part of the brain is more or less out of action, and it's the unconscious part that's operating. We behave as if it's a real event. Now, we can actually use that to our advantage to help us behave differently. And I teach a lot of things about that in terms of habits. So one way of putting this, one way I've seen it explained, is fear can be seen as fake emotion appearing real. So when we imagine something in our minds, we think about a meeting we're going into and we're worried about, we still get the same physical response as if we were doing it for real. So it can have a really big impact on us. That's why when we're caught up in what's going on in our minds, it really does have a genuine impact on us. I think Mark Twain put it far more eloquently than I ever could. I've suffered a great many catastrophes in my life. Most of them never happened. And I think that sums up particularly the stories that we create in our minds when we have one simple little fact and it becomes a much bigger story, and we add a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And those stories can either be positive ones or negative ones, depending on the way we're thinking at any particular time. So just a couple of takeaways from that is habits are very important. Embedding new habits are really, really important. The unconscious mind is far faster and quicker in how we behave when we do things. We have to work a lot smarter and differently to retain positive thoughts and positive habits. And real and imagined thoughts and images in our minds have the same effect. And the language of our unconscious mind, which is really important for some of the things I'll share, is images and emotions. Because if you get those into your unconscious mind, then you can start to program it to do things that you would like to do rather than you're fearful of doing. So at the moment, I'm talking about awareness, which is part of a three-part way that I describe some of these things. So if we go back to my original starting point of everything we ever did or will do started with a thought. If you come back one step, those thoughts are generated based on where we place our attention and our focus, where our mind's going at any particular moment. That generates some thoughts and ideas that either turns into action or inaction. So if we come back a little bit to where are we actually placing our awareness and start noticing where we place our awareness. If it's somewhere we don't want to place it, then we need to start to nudge it back into a place that is helpful and beneficial for us. So there's three ways I tend to think of where we place our attention. The first one is probably the simplest of the lot. Noticing whether our thoughts are in a positive, happy, nurturing, pleasant place, or in a negative, oh my God, this might happen, this is going to happen in a minute, this is what happened in the past, in negative places. So it's just a case really of starting to notice where that head-up display is in our mind and being more aware of it, because a lot of this stuff just happens as a habit. We don't notice we're doing it. As we start to notice it, we can just nudge it back over to whichever side, to the happy side that we would prefer to spend more time in. A very simple habit that you can say in your head is I choose happy. And it just becomes a reinforced habit that you end up doing when you notice your mind just drifting off into unpleasant things. Just nudge it back with I choose happy, and just visualize something that makes you happy with some emotion. That's the really important one. The words are okay, but it's the emotion and the images that really move you into that place in your mind and give your ancient part of your mind the instruction to go and find some pictures and things about happy, pleasant things. The other thing that quite often trips us up is we spend a lot of time either thinking about things in the past or things in the future. Now, I've laid it out left to right like this. Some people see it the other way around. They map it differently. Some people map it as a circle in their minds. But we attach emotion to things we think about in the past and things we're thinking about in the future. We tend to attach less emotion to things that are happening now, which is why there's a lot of work done being in the present moment and being very present of where we are. Now, a couple of really simple ways we can help just trigger our minds back is one, the I choose now, which is similar to the I choose happy, but I've got some other ones that I particularly enjoy. So one very simple one, when I found my mind tripping either into the future or the past, is a book by Derren Brown called Happy. And he's just simply asks himself the question, do I have a problem right now? Do I have a problem right now? Which is a great way of just pulling your mind out of stories that you've got that might happen in the future and things you're maybe regurgitating that have happened in the past. Now, one technique I used a lot about 5 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. She's fine now, but we went through a year of really intensive treatment I gave up my job to make sure I looked after the family. So you can imagine it was quite a difficult time, and the cancer was quite strong at the time. So, and I have an extremely creative mind. My mind naturally was tripping off and thinking about all sorts of things. So one simple thing I taught myself to do was to go for a short walk and literally look down at my feet and ask myself, where are you right now? Because that pulled my head out of all the stories, the dramas, the Mark Twain quote about catastrophes, and reminded me, I'm here right now. The facts are, yes, my wife had cancer at that time. Yeah, money's a bit tough, but that's the fact. Nothing else. All the other stuff was just a story that was going off in my mind. In fact, I only read a couple of years ago the SAS, the Special Services in the UK, where I'm from, actually have a similar technology that they teach their soldiers in the SAS when they're under fire, and maybe their buddies have just gone down, and there's a lot of people trying to get hold of them, and naturally their mind's tripping out into, I'm running out of ammunition, what's going to go on? They think about, what can I affect in 1 square meter, and the next 1 square meter around me, and just focus on that, nothing else. Then get to the next square meter and think about the same thing. So a variation really on the theme of asking yourself, where am I right now? Another thing that I use quite often, people seem to quite like, I call it VAST. It's really simple. I prefer to do it outside in nature. When my mind's going off and wandering off in all sorts of scenarios, is just going out and looking around me and making myself count 5 things that I can see. And then noticing 4 things that I can hear, and just actually acknowledging them. So, you know, I can hear a bird singing, I can hear a train going by, I can hear a car, I can hear the slight rumble of the fan on my computer, things like that. And doing the same thing with smell, taste, and your senses in terms of feeling things. And it just gets your mind back into the present moment and out of the catastrophes that we're so great at creating in our minds. And the third way I like to think of this is when we're thinking about future things, is focusing on either targets, goals, things that we want to achieve, or something we're looking forward to, like a birthday or a holiday and things like that. So it's about that awareness of where we're placing our attention, which then influences the thoughts that we have and the outcomes that we have in terms of action or inaction. So that's the summary. So the next thing is choice. So I spoke about awareness before. The next one is choice, and an acronym is ACE that we're getting to. So this is about choosing where to place our attention. So I'm going to share with you a short video, which is quite an interesting one. Some of you may have seen this before, some of you may not. So bear with me if you have seen it before. And the instruction I've got for you is I want you to keep notice on the players with the white tops, and I want you to count how many times they pass the basketball from one person to the other. So if they pass it once, that's 1 count. If they pass it a second time, that's another count. So your mission is just to focus on the white-topped players and see how many times they pass the ball. So let me run this.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Right, I don't think I helped myself there because I couldn't see the screen. But hopefully you're watching that. So maybe in the chat you can share how many times you think the players wearing white pass the ball. Right, I've got 9s, 14s. Some different answers there. Right. Shall I put you out of your misery? Let me just move something on my screen here. Right.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
So I don't know how many of you noticed the gorilla and the changing of curtain color and how things moved around. I don't know if anyone wants to share in chat what they saw there.
The monkey business illusion.
Interesting. So some of you noticed some of the things, and some of you may have seen this video before. There's been an earlier version of it in the past. But the whole point of that was to explain a particularly fascinating part of our brain. And another way of looking at it, if you consider a time when you bought a different car or a television or a holiday or something like that, let's say you decided to choose a Volkswagen Golf. If you're from Germany, it'd be VW, I guess. And suddenly you start seeing that car around. You notice it in car parks, you notice it your friends have got, maybe at work. You notice advertisements about it. It was always there, but suddenly you start to notice it a bit more. Oops, my slide is not. There we go. And maybe if you've been at a big event and there's lots of noise, kerfuffle, lots of people are talking and having drinks and things like that, and suddenly in the background you hear your name being called, you notice it. You immediately zoom in onto it. Well, that's courtesy of a part of the brain called the reticular activating system, which some of you may have heard of, that physically sits at the base of the brain in the older part of the brain. And its main purpose in life is to focus and filter. So it takes 4 of our senses. It doesn't take smell. That goes straight into our memory system. That's why if we've ever smelt something in particular from our childhood, it really takes us back to a deep memory. So it takes 4 of those senses and filters based on where we're placing our attention. And it also ferrets around in our past memories and gives us anything relevant that we need to help us achieve whatever it is that we're focusing our attention on. So the way I think of it is I call it the RAS belief cycle. So at the top, you've got what your thoughts and images are that you're placing into your mind by what your awareness is. That is effectively an instruction to your reticular activating system to say, I'm going to go and find evidence, one, that this exists, that you're right about whatever idea, theory you've got, and I'm going to help you achieve that by giving you all sorts of little tips and advice and things that I notice that will be relevant for you. And you end up going around in this sort of loop. So now you've started to prove whatever your belief is correct. You've got more evidence and you keep going around in this belief cycle. So these quotes you may have seen before, particularly the Henry Ford one, whether you think you can or you can't, you're probably right, sums that up, because whatever you've decided is going to happen will happen, basically courtesy of the reticular activating system. The one I'm particularly fond of, which our daughter found without my help, is she thought she could, so she did. So it really sums up the science of how the mind's working. That's why I started earlier with that where we place our attention, and the thoughts and emotions that we place our attention are really dictate what our reticular activating system says. Okay, I'm going to either help you achieve this or prove that your particular belief is correct. So basically, we get more of what we focus on. So that's the essence of it, really. Now, you may have come across this or not, I don't know, but I'm going to ask you not to think of a pink elephant. Don't think about a pink elephant. So what's happening? You've probably all got something, a variation of a theme of that going on in your mind, possibly with a big X through it, because you're trying not to think about a pink elephant. Our brains cannot do negatives. They cannot not think of something. So we can actually use this as quite a clever trick. So let me give you a different example. Maybe you've gone to some really nice formal garden somewhere. You can picture the scene. There's lovely lawns, flower beds, all immaculate, and there's a lovely path going down the middle. And you see a sign like this: don't walk on the grass. So what instruction is that giving you? Okay, the logical part of your brain is saying, yes, it's quite clear, don't walk on the grass. But in fact, what it's giving you is an image of you or somebody walking on the grass. That's the image it's actually giving you. And this is particularly pertinent if you've got children. How many times have you said to children, don't do this, don't do that, and they suddenly go and do it? Because you've just given them a picture in their head of what you've asked them not to do. The best thing to do is say, please keep to the path. Now you've given them an image of the path, and that's what you actually want them to do. So we can think of that in terms of visualization. So, and I don't mean visualization in terms of sitting down and sort of formally spending some time visualizing things, which is a great tool, but in its very simplistic way of thinking. So when we're trying to think about things that we want to do, we've got two choices. So if we take the analogy of taking a penalty kick in a football game, you can either think about it going well and sticking the ball right in the back of the net, or you can worry about what might go wrong and you missing the penalty. Two choices, same amount of effort, completely different outcomes, because the image you're giving your mind with it going in the back of the net is a clear instruction to the reticular activating system: help me achieve this, find some bits and bobs in my memories and filter out my senses, things that will help me in that direction. Whereas missing the penalty, you're now using your fear and actually, unfortunately, inadvertently giving an instruction to your reticular activating system in your mind. Actually, that's the thing I want. It's missing the goal. And the thing with the ancient part of the mind is it's not rational. The modern part is. So it would just say, fine, if that's what you want, I'll help you do it. I'm really helpful like that. So the images you place in our minds actually are very important. So you can actually use this as a really clever trick, this don't think about, and insert the thing you do want to focus about. So if I said to you, don't think about the last time you were happy. If I said to you, don't think about how excited you are about achieving your next goal. If I said to you, don't think about the holiday that you're planning, suddenly you can't help but think about it. So it's actually a very clever way, particularly if you struggle to think about what you want to achieve. So there's sort of three parts to that trick, I guess, is the don't bit, because we have to create an image of what we don't want, because that's the only way we can do it. The think part is actually a command word. It instructs your brain to do something. And whatever the subject is that you're talking about, it presupposes that it does actually exist. So particularly when you're going for new goals and things like that, it's a great way of tricking your mind to do what you want it to do. So you can consider it in two ways. You can either, if you're fortunate enough to be able to think about scoring that penalty, fine, just think about the things that you want to achieve. But if you're concerned about your mind tripping to it not going well, not achieving the things you want to do, then you need to flip that around. So, for example, if you're coming up to do a presentation and you've got an image like the one on your left, oh God, fear, gosh, what's going to happen? It's all going to go bad. Everyone's going to laugh at me. Oh, well, I'll remember my words, whatever those thoughts are. If you flip that into it going well, then you can start to push your mind in the right direction. In the same way, say you're worried about a particular meeting or something like that, and you're worried about staying calm in that meeting, and you think, I always get frustrated. You can do it the same way. So don't think about how calm I will feel in that meeting. You can't help but think about being calm. You've now moved your attention away from how you may have felt before. So it's, don't think about what it is you want. Images and emotion. That's the really important thing, because that starts to embed it as a habit. And that was the last part of my technique called ACE. And I'd share a lot about how to embed new mental habits with people. And just a final slide there is neuroplasticity, something people talk about a lot these days. It's just a reminder that up to the age of about 25, 21, more or less our sort of modern rational brain is fully developed. And they used to think our brain was more or less sort of set, but it's now it's proven quite easily that we can change what's going on in our mind and our programming, and neuroplasticity is now sharing that with us. But it's that habits, so it's developing those habits. And if you use images and emotion, that's a great way of programming your new habits that you like. So that's me finished.